as the Operation Iraqi Freedom kicked off, I deployed overseas. I had 2 separate deployments to the Middle East, and it was a really informative period of my life. Here's this history major who suddenly realized I could use some of the communication skills, some of the critical thinking skills that I was taught in the humanities, and apply them to something like missile defense.
Wow.
And it just, realizing that those 2 things collided was really helpful when I thought about life after the Army. It's like, what if I took unique skills and applied them in different places, and it doesn't have to be linear? You know, I don't have to follow a prescribed path.
Welcome to YMI Talking, a podcast where the guests are so good, you'll wonder why the host is even talking. In each episode, you will hear one of the leaders of the Lehigh Valley's vibrant business hub. They will tell you the keys to their success, the mistakes they've made, and what they have in store for the future. Here is the host of YMI Talking, from YMI Insurance, Jimmy Honachik.
All right. I am Jimmy Honachik. This is YMI Talking, and I am just going to dive into this one. I started this podcast really to meet and get the word out on people who are very interesting, who are inspiring, who do great things in the Lehigh Valley. And this is the culmination episode. I have found the person, and I am so excited to have you, Dennis. Dennis Morton from Morton Brown Family Wealth. You have done so much. You are truly, I say this sincerely, an inspiring person. And I can't wait to dive in and get your story out there more.
I appreciate it, Jimmy. Thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this as well.
Absolutely. So, I mean, let's start at the very beginning. Sort of, you're in college and your life. Like, what are you thinking at that point of your life, and how do you get to where you are now?
I really didn't have much of an idea what I wanted to do. You know, I was in college on an Army ROTC scholarship. I knew I probably had a job after graduation, so I didn't have to think too hard about it. I studied the things that I liked, but I didn't know where it was going to go. And ever since then, it's been this meandering path that I love, I relish, and I wouldn't trade for anything. But there was no design here. Like the guidance counselor would be just baffled right now if they were to talk to me today and say, how do you get from there to here? It's history major that goes off into the world.
So history major, and now we are a financial advisor. So, yeah. I mean, I love your story in college. You're in the ROTC, right?
Yes.
And you have extracurriculars that you're involved in. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So at one point in my early adulthood, I was simultaneously an Army ROTC and a Grateful Dead cover band. And I had the worst haircut in both organizations. It was this, I loved straddling both worlds, the music side of it, and then the really disciplined military side, which started to become a passion for me as college kind of unfolded. But I've always appreciated that, and it's kind of extended into my professional life. Like, I've always sought out opportunities to play in a band or to find other musicians, all the while doing things that are a lot more buttoned up.
Walk me through that. So are you saying that you've been able to carry that guitar and that music appreciation into the professional world?
It has been. I mean, there's been, I still remember, I joined the Rotary Club of Bethlehem, maybe 12 years ago or something like that. And I was looking to meet more people. I'd become a total Lehigh Valley resident where I didn't cross rivers. So I was living in Allentown, only knew people in Allentown, and was looking to kind of build relationships and get to know what's happening in other parts of the valley. So part of being in the Rotary Club is you have to give a speech introducing yourself. And I remember writing a speech that was, I'm Dennis Morton. I'm a financial advisor. I have some kids. And it was very like, and the night before, I remember reading it over and practicing it, and then just crumpling it up and throwing it away.
Wow.
And I went back and I said, that's not telling anyone anything. So I went up there and I told the full story, warts and all, of our family, my journey into finance and everything else. I talked about being a guitar player in a dead band. I talked about just how I grew up without football because the Baltimore Colts left in the middle of the night when I was 5 years old, all this stuff. And it was very intensely personal. And I count among 2 of my closest friends, people who came up to me right after that speech and introduced themselves and said, we got to talk.
Yeah.
So ever since those times, I've kind of like talked about being a musician, talked about the other things that round out what make me me and what the things that I find interesting. And it's led to really fruitful relationships.
And what I'm hearing is authenticity. And I think there's not, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I left the financial services world. I left asset management, a large part because there isn't a lot of authenticity that I felt. It's people, putting what they want out there, but not really exposing who they truly are or what they love. But you are coming at it from a place of authenticity. And do you find that that has opened the relationships for you?
It has, but that authenticity is pretty hard earned. I mean, it was not a straightforward path to get there. I entered the Wall Street world early in my career. Was kind of chewed up and spit out by that, and had kind of came to some jaded opinions about what I wanted to do or what the industry was. And I think the migration, as went on to found Morton Brown Family Wealth, is that it's a superpower to be able to convey authenticity. That if you can do that, if people understand who you are and the person that's sitting across from them, then it's helpful in building relationships. Especially, I'm not from the Lehigh Valley, so this was all we knew. I made the mistake of starting a relationship-based business in a town where I knew no one. So you kind of have to get cut to the chase and say, like, why should someone trust you? Who are you? What do you bring to the table?
That's great. There are so many directions I want to take this conversation, and it's very hard to pinpoint exactly where we're going to go. But let's follow your career. You hinted at it in there. So you leave the ROTC, you leave the college, and what's next for Dennis Morton?
Right. So I was commissioned a lieutenant in the Army, and I was assigned to a Patriot missile unit. So, the missile defense was stationed in Fort Bliss, the aptly named Fort Bliss, Texas, out in El Paso. So I studied German for 3 years in college, and the Army sent me to El Paso. Who can predict this stuff? And I did that for a few years, and it was the 9/11 era. So I came into the Army in 1999. 2001. A lot of things changed. I mean, that was a really pivotal year in my life. I met my wife in 2001. Started thinking about what was beyond. I'm pretty sure I didn't want to stay in the Army longer than my 4-year commitment. Mm-hmm. And, but I didn't really have a chance to think about what was going to come next. As the Operation Iraqi Freedom kicked off, I deployed overseas. I had 2 separate deployments to the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And it was a really informative period of my life. Here's this history major who suddenly realized I could use some of the communication skills, some of the critical thinking skills that I was taught in the humanities, and apply them to something like missile defense.
Wow.
And it just, realizing that those 2 things collided was really helpful when I thought about life after the Army. So what if I took unique skills and applied them in different places, and it doesn't have to be linear? Mm-hmm. I don't have to follow a prescribed path. And but I didn't get a chance to plan my exit from the military. I was stop lost, which meant they said, that time you were supposed to get out, you can't get out then anymore. So I didn't have a timeline. And then one day the Army called me up and said, okay, now you're done. And it was like, boom, whirlwind, you're out.
Yeah.
And I got married, moved to the Lehigh Valley, and took a new job all within about 4 weeks of each other.
Wow. I'm digesting all of that. I mean, so you come out and you've made this, connection in your mind that, hey, I have unique skills. I can apply them maybe in places people don't traditionally think about applying them. And so where do you go now that you are here in the Lehigh Valley? What's your first job, and are you applying those skills?
Not really. And that was the hard part. So, yeah, I know, right? I was swinging and missing a lot, if you're picking up on this. It was, I was brought here, a company called Cintas. So hired me and brought me to the Lehigh Valley, working down in Mass. And I did that for a couple of years, but 2 things. One of the reasons why I didn't want a military career is I didn't want to be moving around all the time. And I realized that succeeding in a corporate life might mean, great, you did a good job, now you're moving to Columbus, Ohio.
Right.
And I wanted more stability for my family. But the other thing was, I didn't feel like the skills that I had started to refine in the military were really being applied there. And I had no better explanation for it than that when I told my wife I want to change jobs.
Yeah.
To which she commented at the time, I'm pregnant. And I commented, well, can we still have this conversation? So she was very patient with me. And I spent months just discerning, what was I really good at? What did I enjoy about the military? And is there a profession where I can apply it? And what the insight, which I think is one of the pivotal insights of my life, was that I was very good in the Patriot missile world. You're out in the middle of the desert, you and about 12 other people off by yourself. And sometimes in the middle of the night, someone with a star or a bird, a colonel or a general, pulls onto your site and they know nothing about this Patriot missile system. And as an officer in charge, you can either regurgitate the technical manual and the tactical manual, which they don't care about, or you can give them actionable information so they can go on and make the bigger decisions that they have, because they have a lot of other places they're going that night and a lot of other things to weigh. And I did a pretty good job of that. And I was promoted into roles of greater responsibility where I had to present information. I'd also had a really kind of mediocre experience with a financial advisor. I'd taken a little bit of an interest in investing kind of in the .com era. And I thought, what if I was able to take the complexity of the financial world and explain that to people in a way that impacted them positively? And it wasn't that articulate at the time, but my wife listened to this pitch and she agreed with me when I said, I'm going to try and get a job. And lo and behold, I was offered a job at Smith Barney and started there and went at it. And it's so that was kind of how I had that discernment period of trying to apply what I think I did well to an industry that I really didn't know at all.
Yeah. And communication, like your ability to communicate, sounds central to this. Have you taken that at Morton Brown, and do you consider that sort of the central part of what you guys do?
It really is. For one, finance is a challenging place to communicate authentically. There's a lot of regulation. There's a lot of compliance. If there's a large organization that has thousands upon thousands of advisors, there are a lot of constraints on what those advisors can say. As an independent firm, we're very fortunate to be able to have more latitude. We still have compliance, we still have regulation, but we can talk out loud about how we think and the kinds of inputs. So over time, I've become more confident, and it's kind of been part of our culture to talk out loud about why we think the way that we do, how we approach investing or behavior, even couples relationships. We work with a lot of couples, and money is something that a lot of couples don't talk about.
Yeah.
And our ability to communicate to both spouses, both partners sitting across from us, really has been a superpower. And we write about it, we podcast about it, we do videos about it. And I think that's, again, I joke that I've got to justify this liberal arts degree somehow, and that's how we do it. And language matters too. Just choosing the right words and avoiding jargon.
Yep. And I think you're right. I mean, I had this conversation back when I was in that world that a financial advisor is as much about knowing, the markets and the finance and the technical parts as it is almost being a therapist. And when markets are going down, helping your clients understand now's not the time to panic. So I could see how having a left brain and right brain really works well, and having that, viewpoint that others don't with that history major can really work well.
I heard a quote recently, and I'm going to miss on the attribution, so I apologize to whoever said this, but they commented that finance is 50% math and 50% Shakespeare. That if you focus only on the math, you're going to miss the very human side of it, all the foibles, all the things, all the stuff we bring to the table and everything that we do. And I think that's a really important dynamic to remember, that in the end, there's a person on the other side who's going to have their ups and downs, have emotions, and we need to meet them where they are.
Yeah. Okay. So you strike me as a man of dichotomies, and I mean that in a true, earnest, good way. Like you have the financial advice, and you understand the finance and the technical parts. And then there's a very human element of you. And as I've gotten to know you, family is a big part of that human element, and a really important thing for you. So talk about maybe with Gina and how she has supported you through this. I mean, it sounds like she's almost central to what you've been able to do.
It is. I mean, my relationship with my wife, Gina, it started in that very formative year of 2001. I mean, we met at a wedding in June of 2001. She was a bridesmaid. She was the maid of honor. Wow. I was a groomsman. I walked her mother up the aisle, and just funny story. Sometime after that at the reception, my future mother-in-law went up to Gina and said, who's really nice is that Dennis guy. To which Gina responded, Mom, he's in the Army, he's a year younger than me, and he lives in Texas. No, and no. So I had an uphill climb, but we connected. She was living in Jersey City, New Jersey at the time. I was living in El Paso. So we just talked on the phone for the longest time. We would spend, and this is back when you'd have off-peak hours for cell phones. So we'd be talking in the middle of the night, just getting to know one another.
Wow.
And those hours talking, I think, were very formative because we knew we weren't going to we weren't going to go on a date that weekend. We weren't going to see each other for a long time. And then we finally did. This is kind of a little bit of the backstory. She was living right across the water from Lower Manhattan. And I went to visit her for the first time after meeting her at the wedding on Labor Day weekend, 2001. And we go there, we have a very nice weekend, realizing that there's some chemistry there and thinking, all right, this is a real thing. We're going to start seeing each other on a more regular basis. So we sat at the airport and we laid out all the times that we were going to see each other over the next 6 months to a year.
Oh my God.
I had all these pictures taken we were Battery Park and in Lower Manhattan looking out on the Twin Towers. Wow. And I got those pictures developed on September 10th.
Oh my God. Wow.
And then the next day, so much changes. I knew Gina was going into Manhattan that day for her job. She knew that I was in the middle of a deployment exercise that week where my bags were packed for war in my office as a practice exercise. And neither one of us, it just immediately threw in a lot of reality and patience, because suddenly the plans were not ours to make anymore. And we had to be really patient, and we grew together a lot through that experience. And I feel like we had very clear eyes on who we were as a couple and how we were navigating the world from very early on. And that served us well. I think we've both supported each other well because we've had clear eyes through career and family and everything else.
Yeah. And I mean, September 11th impacted everyone, but I feel like you guys were almost in the crosshairs of that, just geographically, your role in the military. It's unbelievable that you had the clear eyes to get through it, but I can only imagine that has strengthened and formed the sort of family that you've built.
I'd like to think so. And we're trying to impart that to our kids. You know, there's I'm rapidly turning into get off my lawn guy. You can't stop that. But you try and be that person who can convey some of the wisdom that I think we've earned over time without being heavy-handed and letting them have their own experiences and experience the world their own way.
Yeah. And you're helping them have experiences. Talk about the most recent one that you as a family had.
Yes. So we just returned from a 5-week-long family sabbatical, and we spent 4 weeks traveling around Europe as a family of 6. We have 4 children, aged 17 down to 7, and we took a month off to go travel Europe. And it was equal parts a family plan and a business plan, because we've built this into the culture of the business that after 5 years of service in the company, every employee is eligible for a 5-week-long sabbatical. Get out of town, go clear your head, do what you want to do, spend it however you want to spend it. And we hit our 5-year anniversary this year, and I went first. So it was an incredible experience. Still digesting it. I mean, we're only back a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Still digesting it, but just something that my future self will never regret taking that time.
No. And walk me through the business decision there, because as a business owner, I can see the point where you go, I'm giving them 5 weeks off. Like that's an insane hit on sort of my productivity and my bottom line. How do you view it? Clearly not that way.
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate to have a partnership. So my partner, Katie Brown, and I, we've been working together for a number of years. We founded the firm in 2018. And right around 2020, we were struggling with the idea of a big, hairy, audacious goal. Like, what are we going to set something out there? We're growing. We have we're adding employees. But is there some kind of true north that we're putting out there that in 10 years, this is what we're going to be? Because we said we could grow accidentally or we can grow intentionally. And we wanted to grow intentionally. So we put down some numbers and metrics and all those other, wonky things, but it never felt quite right. And the reason was, after some discussion with Katie, we didn't have any qualitative metrics in there. There wasn't anything about the quality of life. So in 10 years, my kids are going to be, grown and gone potentially. Her kids are going to be older. Did we miss out on that season of life? And, so we decided, all right, let's do this sabbatical idea. And it was very theoretical for a couple of years because nobody had been there for 5 years yet. And then reality hit and we had to execute. So it was just something we wanted this to be built in, that I'm not indispensable. that there's nothing in my head that if I were to walk away that the team couldn't handle. And it was just flawless the way they executed on it. It was, clients were so supportive. Like the minute we would tell them about it, they were just like, that sounds great. Wow. That's just tell us all about it. Show us the pictures, everything. So it really was an extraordinary experiment, I guess, for lack of a better term, but it's something I would highly recommend. And I'm just fortunate that we've built it into the culture.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, talk more about culture. It's something that I think about all the time here. I'm curious how you approach it and how you build it in. Clearly, things like this, I mean, it's top of mind for you. So I'd love to hear more about how you think about it.
It's an interesting place to be, having founded a firm and starting from scratch, because I think a lot of times the words that are used in place of culture are, this is the way we've always done things. Our culture is that, we do things a certain way. And we've tried to avoid that a little bit, and having no sacred cows and making sure that, this idea of make it better has been really important to us. That if there's a process that I'm inhibiting, then we need to make it better and remove me as a roadblock. And having that from the get-go within the firm, we do quarterly offsites with our team, and just constantly asking that question: how do we make it better? How do we make it better? And then also allowing letting our balance show through. Like, that was an important thing about the sabbatical. I think some leaders think their role is to set the example of being the first nose on the grindstone, right? And like, don't make sure you're always hustling.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what we want. I think that's sacrificing an important part of our culture. And we've been able to grow extraordinarily well despite that. And that takes a whole team, and Katie and I are trying to model that behavior.
That's great. And so I'm realizing we have a gap in your history, right? So between, was it Smith Barney? Was that your first job?
Yes.
And then Morton Brown. So talk to me a little bit about how you got from there to here, and let's dive into that.
Yeah. So the long and short of it, I was fired. Wow. I was fired from my first job in finance. And
isn't that crazy though? Like, look at how successful you've been with Morton Brown and what you've done, that you can be in a role in the same field and get fired from it.
Yeah. And that's, I was just thinking about the word success the other day. We had a side conversation within the office, and I think it has to do with the definition of success. My definition, and this comes back to the patience thing, from the first weeks, months working on Wall Street, I had a long-term view. Like, this has to be something that works in the long term. I'm sacrificing too much. I'm walking away from a job that was supporting my family. My wife was a stay-at-home mom with our soon-to-be first child. And so there's a lot at stake. And I had a long view. But the measure of success back then, when I started on Wall Street, was how much are you earning in commissions? Very short term. And so I decided I was building a long-term clientele and was doing a pretty good job of that. But what I wasn't doing was generating enough commission near term to be satisfactory. So after about 18 months, I got a knock on the door from the branch manager saying, by the way, we're going to have to let you go.
Wow.
And I had to go home to my wife and explain to her that this job that I've really fallen in love with is not going to be here next week.
Oh my God.
And
did you say you had a child and Gina was pregnant?
We had one child, and we just had the one at home.
Yeah.
But Gina had just turned in her full resignation, saying she wasn't going to come back off of maternity leave. I think it was like a week earlier.
Oh my God.
So I get the notice, and they actually let me go. I had to leave. I still have the firing letter in my desk drawer. But a couple of weeks later, they were able to bring me back in a different role. But the writing was on the wall that the decisions about my family's future and my career were two things. One, they were made outside of the office because they wanted to keep me there.
Yeah.
But the powers that be said no. And the second thing was, my long-term view was not going to be rewarded in that environment.
Right.
So within a couple of months, I was back at the office, and I received a phone call. I'd given my business card to somebody. I received a phone call from an independent firm that was looking for a young advisor, and I took the interview and went independent in 2008, and have been independent ever since.
Wow. That's amazing. And again, a relationship business, as you said. So how have you been able to establish those relationships in the Lehigh Valley? Like what has made it work for you?
It had a lot to do with commitment.
Mhm.
You know, my wife and I have joked for years that at this point we're 20 years into our 2-year plan in the Lehigh Valley. We had no intention to stay here. We didn't know anyone. We were going to go back to Baltimore, where I'm from. We're going to go back to Philadelphia.
Yeah.
This is just a way station. So we didn't put much effort into the Lehigh Valley for the first couple of years that we were here.
Mhm.
And then we started to get some traction. Then we started to have some life experience, and we just felt the support and the reciprocity of this community.
Mhm.
And it made us want to do more. So we started, we just started raising my hand. I remember getting a call from someone on the Allentown Symphony board saying we were interested in, it was a fundraising call or looking for a donation. And I just asked him, are you guys looking for any help? Like, can I serve on a committee or something? And he said, well, you can serve on the fundraising committee. We're always looking for those. So I just started showing up to meetings. And then within a year, I was on the board of the symphony, and
Wow.
and we just kept raising our hands. You know, Father Dan Gambit at DeSales.
Mhm.
I asked him one time if I wanted to get to know people in Bethlehem, where would I go? And he was the one who directed me to the Rotary Club of Bethlehem. And we just kept asking more questions and going deeper, and the reciprocity just kicked in. And that's all of our formative relationships have come just from those initiatives and being the new people. We didn't know any better. So
Yeah.
we just started asking around and didn't take anything for granted, for sure.
That's great. And talk about fundraising. I mean, it's such a weird thing, but you can develop relationships out of it. I mean, how do you approach it? What are some of your success stories there?
So the fundraising comes from actually is born of a pretty challenging time in our lives.
Mhm.
So when we had our first son, and then took the job, moved independent. Shortly thereafter, my wife had a second son, and he was born with congenital leukemia. He was born at Lehigh Valley Health Network, and we knew something was wrong right away. His name was Teddy, and this was December of 2008. And unfortunately, Teddy couldn't be treated here in the Lehigh Valley. The doctors came in and said that, I mean, he was diagnosed with cancer on his second day on Earth, and they said, you're either going to have to go to Philadelphia or Hershey, one of the two. And it ended up being Hershey for us. So we uprooted, moved out to Hershey, stayed in a Ronald McDonald House.
Wow.
And Teddy was in chemotherapy within 3 days of being born.
Oh my God.
And I commuted back and forth to work. Gina stayed out there in the Ronald McDonald House and in the hospital with Teddy. And we did that for 4 months. And unfortunately, he passed in April of 2009. And that experience, when I talk about that commitment and that reciprocity, that's what kicked it into overdrive, because the support from the Lehigh Valley for us when we were living far away, the support that we felt from just the various people, it made us feel like this is our home now.
Yeah.
Like we're not leaving here for anything. And we came back and said, all right, now here's what we're going to do to commit. And one of the things so hence when the fundraising call came in, I just had this idea that at some point we might want to raise money for something big.
Yeah.
Let's learn how to do it.
Yeah.
Let's figure this out. So every committee, every board that I joined, I would always ask to be on the development committee, just to learn how people go about raising money for causes that they support.
Yeah.
Early on too, we went to the hospital networks, we had some connections out there and said, by the way, our experience wasn't so much about cancer as it was about not having care close to home.
Right.
It could have been any diagnosis, but something that catastrophic that we ran into so many families that were going to Philadelphia, commuting down for chemotherapy or commuting out to Hershey. So we went to the hospital and said, if anybody's ever going to build a children's hospital, let us know, because we'd love to help in any way we can. And we didn't have many nickels to rub together at the time, but just we put that out there. 5-6 years later, I get a call about a feasibility study, and they would like to interview us to talk about the possibility of building a children's hospital in the Lehigh Valley. And here we are. Now we have, all the care that we had to leave to go to Hershey for is now here. And we were part of the executive committee, the campaign executive committee, to help raise money. We gave talks and, talked to donors and everything else. And it's become a really important cause for us to create something that wasn't there before.
Yeah. It's amazing. And the Riley Center is such a great place. Is that what you're referring to, the Riley Center?
Yeah, the Riley Children's Hospital, the
Yeah.
Lehigh Valley Health Network. Yeah, and it is just extraordinary. I mean, that's the thing about the Valley, Jimmy. And you know this is that 25 years ago, and this is still the case. You look around and say, why isn't this here? And we're the third largest population center in Pennsylvania, and it's just this gap that so many wonderful donors have rushed into to say this needs to be rectified, and it's something that we can raise the quality of life. And we've been frequent users of the the children's facilities and getting over to the ER occasionally for some stub toes and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But just seeing those kinds of developments and also encouraging the next generation of donors is really important to us. And that's something that we talk about in the business and we talk about personally, is to say there's a lot of people with names on buildings who aren't here anymore. And the next generation of donors is looking to going to need to step up and help support the causes that we think are important. So we've talked to other people, say, let us know what you're doing because we want to help too. Yeah. And the reciprocity kicks in. Yeah.
I didn't even realize, my goodness, that we are already at the 30-minute mark. I could talk to you literally all day. Your stories are incredible. I wasn't joking when I said that you are one of the most inspiring people and interesting people.
I appreciate that.
In the Valley and on this podcast. But speaking of podcasts and speaking of interesting people, talk about what you're doing. I know that is something you have branched into now, right?
Yes. So my partner Katie and I have a podcast called Simply Why, and it's a podcast about money and purpose. So there's kind of that financial and human conversation there. And we've really done that not so much to talk about advice. I think sometimes when we turn on financial voices, if you turn on TV or radio, you hear a lot of people saying, you should do this or you should do that. Mm-hmm. This is about how we think. It's about the things that we've learned in working, especially with couples and spouses, and helping people to understand that there's a different way to approach everything from your relationship with your advisor, your relationship with your spouse, how to become comfortable with the idea of enough. Like, when do I have enough? Because always wanting more, that can create anxiety and everything else. So we're really trying to push the conversation around money into a healthier place for people. Yeah. And we're really enjoying it. It's just, I love the podcast medium, and we're really enjoying the process of creating it.
And so, I mean, that speaks to me, and I struggle with that. I tell my staff all the time, like, I'm a big Hamilton fan, like, I'll never be satisfied, but you got to get to a point where you're satisfied, I think. And so if you're able to communicate that via the podcast, I think that's a super interesting take, and one that I'm going to check out.
Jimmy, I think one idea that we've been toying with recently is enough is a very internal element, much like success.
Yeah.
Enough, success, they all fit into the same category. And it's either something you recognize internally, but the minute you walk outside and look around, it all goes haywire, because you look at the person next to you, he's got this over there, she's got that over there, and the idea of enough gets lost in that. Mm-hmm. So it's just really trying to nudge people into give them that confidence. Confidence is a great outcome.
Yeah,
and to build that up is worthy.
Have you guys enjoyed the podcast so far then?
We have it. I think one of the best things about being a business owner and working in a startup culture is inside jokes, because there are all these things that just, like, there'll be a turn of phrase and just immediately, Katie knows exactly where I'm going with this story. She's heard this one a million times, and just the idea that you have rapport and can talk about those things and have that come through in the course of a conversation. I think it's fun.
I was just talking to someone. It's a couple, and I'm going to have them on the podcast, and he was like, "Do you want me and my wife?" And I was like, yeah, that interaction between people who know each other, it brings a whole different element to it. So I can imagine you two together is more engaging than each of you alone.
And we're different. I mean, Katie is much more, she's much more detail oriented. I'm strategic and looking out over the next hill. Yeah. And that, I think that's helpful, that we're not tripping over each other. In fact, when we did a personality test years ago, it kind of did an A to B thing where you did the personality test and it showed, okay, how do you work together? Mm-hmm. And one of the readouts from the personality test was, don't ever build anything together.
So, you and Katie?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Get out. And you built an entire business together.
Yeah, that's right. So much for that.
That's so funny. All right. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. I wanted to give a shout out to our sponsors, Notch Modern Kitchen and Bar. They are awesome and I love them. And they do these custom cocktails. I don't know. Have you been there before?
Yes.
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 They do these custom cocktails where you kind of tell them what mood you're in and give them an alcohol and they put it together and it's amazing. And so I do this with all my guests. We kick it up a notch. It's the end of the week. You're ready to let loose and you're reaching for something. What is Dennis Morton reaching for?
It's probably an old fashioned.
That's me too. Yep.
That's where I'm going to go with it. So old fashioned is worthy. Also, maybe a little sip of sunshine, which is nice. I think it's New Hampshire or Vermont. The Lawson Sip of Sunshine. It's a great beer.
Oh, I haven't heard of it. Okay, I'll check it out.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, very good stuff.
Well, Dennis, again, I can't say it enough. Thank you so much for coming on. This really was, your stories are incredible. And so listening to it has been wonderful, and I appreciate everything.
Thanks, Jimmy. It was a pleasure.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the YMI Talking podcast. If you enjoyed this and want to hear more content from amazing personalities in the Valley, please subscribe, leave a rating, and drop us a quick review.